Welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast.
Hello there from Los Angeles. How are you all? You well? Have you had a good weekend? I'm just preparing to head back to the UK. I'm going to be heading back tomorrow, but I do have a bonus show today. I've got an old unreleased show from the archives with Pete Rizzo. So just to let you know, for various reasons, not all interviews I've done have been released. I've got about 4 or 5 that for various reasons just haven't made it out. And I had previously recorded this show with Pete Rizzo, who at the time was the editor-in-chief at CoinDesk, and that was done during Consensus. But following the interview, my show editorial went Bitcoin only, and due to the topics we discussed, I decided just to archive it because I just didn't think it was relevant anymore. But I did enjoy our chat, and I've always liked Pete, always got on with him. So following his departure, I thought I would just release it, get it out there, because I think some of you might be reading about him and maybe have never heard from him. So yeah, here it is, getting it out there. I do just want to give a very quick shout out to all my sponsors up front though. So Kraken, the best exchange in the world with spot, futures, margin trading, their OTC desk and indices. They have all your trading needs covered. With security in their DNA, it is the only place that I used to trade. Join me in supporting Kraken by heading over to kraken.com, which is Kraken.com. Next up, BlockFi, the future of Bitcoin and financial services. They've got crypto-backed loans and crypto interest accounts, which I am myself using. If you want to find out more, head over to blockfi.com, which is blockfi.com. Also, we've got Dropbit, the best mobile wallet for Bitcoin. Text and tweet Bitcoin to your friends. It is like a Venmo for Bitcoin. If you want to find out more, it's available on the iPhone and Android. Just head over to dropbit.app, which is dropbit.app. Also, we've got CIS. I'm going to be speaking there, doing a couple of live podcasts. It's going to be in Los Angeles on October the 15th, and they've just launched a campaign to give everyone a free ticket to their conference. Find out more by heading over to cis.la/WBD. And lastly, but not least, is MyBookie, a great place to bet on live sports, including the NFL, and they accept Bitcoin, which is pretty cool. Join now, and MyBookie will double your first deposit with the promo code WBitcoin. Just visit mybookie.ag, which is MYBOOKIE.ag. Okay, as I said, while I was out in New York for Consensus in May, I caught up with Pete Rizzo, the editor-in-chief at CoinDesk at the time. And as some of you have probably read this week, Pete has left his position. So with that news, I thought I would dig the interview out and let some of you hear from him, because some of you might have not heard from him before. It was a kind of a tough choice because some of the stuff we discussed in there is a bit shitcoiny, and my show's moved on beyond that. But I like the guy. I've always liked the guy. So yes, I wanted to get it out there. And in Bitcoin and crypto, it is very hard to find unbiased views. Everyone has a vested interest in projects, and being able to trust the source of news is always tough. And with Pete Rizzo, I know he doesn't have a Bitcoin maximalist view. He is open to altcoins, and some of his opinions I don't agree with. He is still a very trustworthy source of news in the space, and I've always respected his approach at CoinDesk. So this interview is obviously timely. Pete and I discuss journalistic freedom and responsibility and the difficulties in providing content that challenges the status quo whilst maintaining readership and profitability. It's also clear to see Pete loved working at CoinDesk, and he's done so much for the company. So I was very surprised when I heard this happen, and it was really nice to see some of the tweets coming out in support of him afterwards. I think he's going to be lost to the team at CoinDesk, but obviously that will be someone else's gain. If you've got any questions about the show, do reach out to me. My email address is hello@whatbitcoindid.com, and I look forward to hearing from you. How you doing, Pete?
I'm doing well. I'm tired after a long blockchain week.
It was a long week. I'm ruined by it. Completely and utterly shattered.
It's a stamina game.
Yeah. I didn't feel like this last year. I don't know why.
Can't comment on that. I don't know. I feel like I did about the same gauntlet. Conferences from Friday to Thursday, so.
Well, we're multitasking here as well because I'm publishing an episode.
Okay. Are you rolling right now?
We're recording now. Yeah, this is all part of it now. But I'm also publishing.
This is a great intro. We really just started with a bang, right?
Yeah. Well, do you know what? This is whenever I come to the States, I have a time issue because the latest I want to get.
It's tea time for you. You're
it's 8:30 p.m. in the UK. So if I release the show now, it's coming out quite late. So usually when I'm in the US, I will try and get everything ready the night before.
Where do you publish on US time, or what do you publish on your time?
I try and publish morning UK, 11, 12.
Because I always wonder about that because, this is CoinDesk publishes all the time, but you wonder whether you're just like making arbitrary choices or not. Like we start publishing in like UK time, but does it really matter to anybody? Like,
I think in the grand scheme of things, if people want to hear the show, they will. And, I put enough noise out there that people can hear about it. But I'm quite interested as a measure the total number of downloads for the day of release, because it's an interesting measure of how important that show is. So I always try and get it out at a similar time, which is the morning.
Well, we can get to the good stuff because we're just like talking about publishing times.
People might find this interesting, especially as we're doing it at the same time. But whenever I'm in the US, I have to get it all ready the night before. And then my hotel had terrible Wi-Fi, so I couldn't publish it before I got here, and here we are. But do you know this is the most common name of someone I've interviewed?
Oh, what the most common name is?
Yeah.
I think is it Peter?
It's Peter.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. There's a lot of Peters in the space. It's hard to be a first name. There's no like first name Peter.
Yeah.
Because there's Peter Todd. I think. Well, I go by Pete also.
Well, Peter, it's the same
Yeah.
thing. I changed to Peter a few years back because I thought it
do you like the R?
Yeah, I do. I think it sounds more intelligent.
You know what I've noticed about the R? You can hear it. Like when I say Pete, like in a loud area, they say like people just don't hear it because it's like one syllable. But if in a really crowded area, it's like I have to use the R because it's like Peter. So there's that second enunciation that lets people hear it.
There was this footballer in the UK, Premier League footballer called Mickey Thomas, and he changed his name to Michael Thomas to sound more intelligent. And I always thought Peter McCormack sounded more intelligent because I'm not that bright.
Actually, you're a doctor, right? Is that a real thing?
I am a doctor. I'm Dr. Peter McCormack.
Are you a real doctor though? I don't know. I have no frame of reference. Like,
You don't know why I changed that name?
No, is it because of the Craig Wright
Yeah,
stuff?
because Dr. Craig Wright.
Okay,
So
yeah.
if he's a doctor, I'm also a doctor.
Well, everybody's a doctor, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone's becoming a doctor. But yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Sure.
Good week
thanks
for
for
you.
having me. Blockchain week for us is sort of the Super Bowl. You prepare for it months in advance. It kind of consumes like all of your waking thinking for several months, and then it happens, and you just hope that nothing goes horribly wrong.
How much work goes into it?
A ton. Yeah, we started planning like the end of 2017, like probably earlier. I was having meetings like by September because it's a whole thing, like people, you're organizing 4,000 people, right? So you get your sponsors, attendees, blah, blah, blah. So by the time it comes down to it, it feels like a minor miracle because, you like think about it and plan about it so much and then it happens. And a lot. But yeah, we have a whole team. We have a whole events team, CoinDesk is a business. That's a thing that happens. That wasn't always true, but it's nice that it is a thing.
It was significantly better than last year.
Yes.
But for a couple of reasons. Not just because it wasn't so crowded. There seemed to be more of a focus on Bitcoin, and that may be just because the market conditions have led people towards Bitcoin, but there was a lot more focus on Bitcoin. Also, interestingly, this year, I didn't go to any of the talks apart from the ones I moderated, but got more out of the event by doing that. And it sometimes feel like these events are becoming more of a networking thing.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Well, I think when you do a conference, right, it's supposed to be like an open forum. So I think people get, I don't know, they sort of I guess how do I explain this? A good conference should be like a mirror of the times, right? And that's not like a defense that you can't make them better than the times. It's not like something I necessarily disagree with there, but I'm saying the content should if done correctly should reflect the current state of discourse. And I think the current state of discourse is that Bitcoin is having a renaissance, if you will, as sort of the leading indicator of the entire market, which wasn't always true. We've seen a number of phases come and go where there was the Bitcoin startup bubble of 2013, then there was sort of the private blockchain, bank blockchain bubble, then there was the token bubble, and it does. I do agree with the idea that people are sort of returning to Bitcoin as an intellectual concept that is sort of the leading indicator of the market. So I wasn't surprised to see that, but I don't think that's a function of the conference, right? So as a conference organizer or event planner, and I'm just I consult on the event planning, but I don't do the scheduling. I think it's you can't control what everybody says, right? There's no way you can control what we had 400 speakers this year, and there was probably 4 or 5 different panels going on every time, right? So there's only so much control you can have over what people are going to say or talk about. Certainly the focus on last year was very speculative, but that was also the time, right? You can't police what attendees are going to say or talk to you about, right? As much as we would like to. And look, I think with last year, the Lamborghinis and stuff, right? So that's a weird situation where some other company just rented a bunch of Lambos and parked them outside. Then all of a sudden we're culpable for that narrative, right? It reflects on us, even though we had nothing to do with it, no idea about it, and found out about it, right? So Yeah, I mean, the conference game has been interesting. I mean, I've seen the business model kind of evolve and change since we started it in 2015. And, I think this entry was good, but I think, a lot of people get out of conferences what they want to get out of them. Sometimes they'll hate things because they want to hate things, right?
It's funny, though, because you said to me beforehand, people's view on Bitcoin tends to reflect their view on politics.
Oh, did I say that? Okay.
You become more conservative.
Oh, yeah. I think so. Well, so this is another thing. So, I mean, I don't speak very publicly a lot about things, as you kind of alluded to when we first started this, because I've never really wanted my opinions to like be what people think CoinDesk stands for, right? I think that's like, so personally speaking, like I think as someone who has been a journalist in this industry since 2013, I think I have become more convinced about Bitcoin, like on a personal level. And I feel like, there's a saying that I've been, recently that I've been kind of modeling, which is like an old political saying of like, it's like if you're a Republican at 20, shame on you, you have no heart. And if you're a liberal at 40, shame on you, you have no head, right? So I think there's, I think like I've become more conservative, more Bitcoin focused, but I think I still try to have like a heart for the people who are doing new projects because, and I talked to like Whale Panda about this at Magical Crypto Conference, which was basically, I feel like Bitcoin maximalism sometimes is like kind of an anti-human approach. Like you're sort of just like saying, oh, like all humans forever, like will never make anything better than this one protocol that has been created. So I don't know. I'm not short humanity. I think like, we can assume that over time, like that something better might come of this. Maybe. And like, look, that's possible or not possible, but you don't really know.
Yeah. And it's obviously something I've wrestled with quite a bit over doing the podcast. The early days I was open-minded to anything and would interview anyone, and I got some stick for my Craig Wright and Roger Ver interviews. And then over time my views hardened, and now I only own Bitcoin. But I have a interest in Monero. I think it's an interesting project, and I have a curiosity with other things.
Yeah, but there's also this like weird social reinforcement of that stuff too, right? Like sometimes like things become the norm, and like you're not really even sure why. I mean, do you think that most people have a sophisticated like opinion about Monero, or do they just like Fluffy Pony and they let it? Like Fluffy Pony is like an odd. So I am friends with Ricardo, like personally, like we've a bit beyond what a normal journalistic relationship would be like. And the thing that I've like told him about that I find really odd is that there's sort of this like social exclusion of like ICO projects, and there's this social inclusion of Monero, and I find them both like equally uninformed. like I don't think that people are into Monero because they love the white paper and understand the code. They like Fluffy Pony, and he supports like things that like people tell them to like or that they feel they should like, and so they just like them for that reason, right? There's not. I think a lot of people like assume that there's like a heavy amount of intellect here. And so one of the things I was researching my interview for Justin Sun, because like I for some reason asked to interview him at Consensus. But the thing that I found as I talked to people is like I was like, why don't you like Tron? And like no one actually, like very very few people actually had a substantive answer. I think Chris Burdinsky was the one person who had looked at the code, had some critiques about their go-to-market strategy, and could say something beyond like, oh, I just think that guy is ridiculous. But like they're like you talk about the don't trust verify, and it's like how much of that is just a t-shirt slogan? It's like a lot of it probably.
Well, I interviewed Fluffy, and I said to him, there's Bitcoin maximalism, and then Bitcoin maximalism, but Monero is okay. And
well, the argument there would be it's not Bitcoin extremism, which is like the Charlie Lee like coined ideology.
Yeah, which does exist, and it's tough to
Well, who's that like one guy? There's like one old timer guy, I can't remember his name, but he believes that like Bitcoin software version like 10.4.1 is like the only Bitcoin or something. I just made up a number, but he has a very specific implementation where he's like, that's the only Bitcoin that ever existed.
All right, okay. I mean, look, there are different levels, and it's a funny thing, I started a podcast for no other reason that I just had an idea one weekend when I was in Los Angeles, and it's grown into this thing. And I have no journalistic background. I didn't study it. And people have suddenly started saying to me, over the time, like, you've got a responsibility. You're a journalist. You're producing content. People listen to you. And I'm like, okay. Well, if I have a journalistic responsibility, then I must explore subjects that I'm curious about. So, for example,
right. So yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, I've always said, and got a lot of criticism for this, but I've always said that I firmly believe Roger Ver 100% believes what he is doing is right, whether it is or wrong. I don't believe he's doing it because he wants to make more money.
Right.
And I need to explore why people believe in this project, even if it's to help people get back to Bitcoin. I can't do it without exploring it. And also, I find Ethereum, there's lots of nonsense in there, but I find it hard to ignore something like MakerDAO.
That's a definitely real thing, yeah.
Yeah, so I have to explore these subjects, even if I explore it to find out for myself or educate people back. But as I do it, then I get people saying you shouldn't be doing this. You're giving a platform.
But you get this groupthink, the ideology stuff, and right. And I think to the extent that maybe you've found journalism, it's maybe that you just didn't accept easy answers. And I feel like that's why I was saying about the Monero thing. It's like how many people actually have like a well reasoned view on that, or is it just like becomes a socially acceptable like herd norm, right? So like. Here's a good example. Like, are you a rock fan? Like, are you a fan?
Yeah, man. I'm like full metal. Look, that's
Okay,
the. Do you know Alice in Chains?
Yeah.
That's Lane Staley.
It's Lane Staley. Okay, so
Yeah.
you know Tool, right?
Yeah, of course.
So Tool's
Man.
image. So here's so
That
Tool's
is the Bitcoin of metal.
So Tool's image is that they have no image, right? Which is an image. Like it is an image. So like sometimes being an antithesis to something is just as condensed as the other version. So I guess what I mean by that is that like sometimes if you take the stance of like you have no image, like you can also fall into the trap of like having an image, even though like you're trying to like you end up like kind of falling into the trap of the thing that you're trying to avoid.
Oh man, I can't believe Tool came up in this interview.
Yeah, I'm not a huge Tool fan, but I do find, well, not that I don't like them, I just haven't really listened to them too much. But I think it's an interesting way to look at like ideologies and like how they form, because I think that there is like good intellectual like experimentation in the space. I am surprised there's like not more open-mindedness. I think this is what I think you had Chris DeRose on recently, and he did a good job of like. You almost like never want to fall in the trap of like, he called it like oracleizing, right? And when you sort of like believe your stump speech so much that like your stump speech becomes like a self-reinforcing prophecy, and that's like all you believe and you can't see past it. And I think like that was something I took from his show where he was very critical of people who did that. And you can kind of see like within the industry that people kind of crest, right? They sort of rise to these positions where they're like godheads and everything that they say is like, the golden shit. And then they like, 3 or 4 months later, they're pariahs because they don't like stay malleable, they don't change. They sort of atrophy, like they get to a point where they believe something and they sort of like atrophy intellectually as that. Ironically, I actually do think it happened to Chris and Junseth, even though they like sort of started with this critique. But it's something I've been very worried about. That's like one of the reasons like I'm not too public with what I think about and my opinions of the space, because I think there's a risk of you atrophying, like you just sort of like become a cliche of your own viewpoints because you don't actually like you stop like actually finding reasons that you might be wrong.
Yeah, I do also sympathize with a lot of the thoughts of the maximalists. Bitcoin is so important. It's clearly something special. It's very important.
Yeah, so what I would say to that is that this is what I've called sort of like the lie of CoinMarketCap. And the irony is that like to compare any of the other networks to Bitcoin is almost a fallacy, because it's so much larger just in terms of like intellectual investment, like capital investment, human investment. I mean, like, even if you take, a company like Bitmain when they were mining Bitcoin, I don't even know what they're doing now, but, they had thousands of people like running machines all the time. Like just the lie of CoinMarketCap and why CoinMarketCap was successful is it gave us like sort of this like weird, like single individual picture of the industry. But I actually do really agree with this, that like it's almost like the total lie to like put anything else in the same class as Bitcoin.
Yeah. Do you know, interestingly, I've not heard people to talk about that too much, but Stefan Rivera, he has an excellent podcast. He says in it, it's Bitcoin, not crypto. He doesn't even want to hear the term crypto. He just wants Bitcoin to be separate.
Well, so that I disagree with, because, like, I mean, the shittiest shitcoin has a utility, right? It can hold value. That's, like, kind of the funny part of it, right? So it's like you have Bitcoin at the spectrum where it's like there's so much intellectual investment. There's so much, like, physical investment, right? Like, Zappo is a company, like, they have a, like, multi-million-dollar hole in the ground where they literally just fucking bury, like, QR codes with Bitcoin, right? Like, that doesn't exist for, like, these other networks, right? Like, they're not mature enough. They're not substantial enough. They don't have the investment. But on the other hand, like the other irony of that is you go to like, shitcoin number 1100, and it's like the difference between that and shitcoin number 600 is like nothing. They both work. They have like there's a baseline utility to cryptocurrencies in that like I can send them from one place to the other. If you sell it on exchange, you can get some value back. So it is weird. It's like on both one hand, you have that Bitcoin is like so clearly the thing, but then like the baseline utility of cryptocurrencies is mostly the same.
Well, I always think about it like restaurants, right? So I
Okay.
think of, no,
Where
but I
you
think
going?
well, no, because I think like you have a town and you have like the best restaurant in town, right? And it's amazing, it's brilliant, it has the best food, but it has anyone can pretty much go and eat there, but is that a reason for another restaurant not to exist? Right? Can you not open a restaurant because there's another great restaurant? Like, if you want to create some kind of shitcoin and you're not trying to lie to people, or you're just trying to do something, create a project, what is actually wrong with that? Like, I think the shittest of shitcoins is probably better than Bitcoin Cash. And the reason I say that is I think Bitcoin Cash has done some very misleading things, with the bitcoin.com domain, where they...
There's actually a bitcoin.com hat, by the way.
I've got the T-shirt. When I visited Roger, he gave me a couple of the I was going to wear one to the Blockstream party as a joke.
I did, yeah. I
did you?
That, yeah. We would have both been doing the same hammy joke.
The same trolling. but there has been lies and there has been things that aren't great, and but the shit is a shitcoin. If you want to create a blockchain and create some monetary thing, why
is
can't you?
An interesting word that you bring that up. I think it's very hard to find objective truth like in cryptocurrencies.
Okay, fair,
and I do really believe that it's very difficult. Tell me like one thing that's true, like in the industry, like that's like unprovably like this is like an absolute truth, and like I just don't know. I've seen so many things that people think are absolute truths just like totally just get destroyed.
Well,
like the absolute truth was that Bitcoin, like in 2013, was that Bitcoin was the protocol that would prevail because it was the most established and network effects, and that was the absolute truth. Like we would cover like Dogecoin or Aurora Coin or the early alts, right? And like we would get blasted like by people because it wasn't like the VC like industry norm, because like but now the mantra of Silicon Valley like couldn't be more different, and now it is tokenization, is that everything will be tokenized or some modification of that. So that's why I have to say it's like it should be like people who don't haven't been in the space in a while, it's like their tendency is to sort of like come to the industry and then sort of like think that like what people are thinking now, and like I'm very critical of some people in the space who are like journalists who I think have like done this also, where it's like they come to the space now and they're like, oh, like these truths that like people, crypto Twitter like must be totally right about itself, and I've seen so many versions of crypto Twitter like at this point.
Well, there are also some contradictions, like so people talk about Bitcoin for freedom, it's freedom, it's censorship resistance, but any attempt to just try and find some objective truth or try and navigate certain topics, you can hit a wall of shit. It can be a threat to your business. I've had, there's this guy, Shinobi Brian Trolls, who openly tagged.
Oh, Shinobi, yeah.
Yeah, so he openly tagged one of my sponsors, Kraken, and said, why are you sponsoring him? Which is attacking my income. Now, I don't actually, when I interview someone in Bitcoin Cash or Ethereum, the downloads are always lower than Bitcoin. So like I can take this easy path, just do Bitcoin interviews and just be like the Bitcoin marketing department, but it doesn't answer questions I have. And I still got loads of unanswered questions on the Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash. I mean, I'm there and I've solved it for me in my own head, in that you can't have, I saw this at the conference in the exhibition hall, there was some protocol, and the advert, it said 100% decentralized. And I was like, how can you be? There is no measure that hits 100%, but I think you should aim for maximum decentralized. That's really important to keep away from governments, okay? I think that's an important target and an objective, and for me, Bitcoin does that, and I don't want Bitcoin to give up on that. But in that process, I do have these other open questions. These things that I haven't found conclusive answers for.
So what I would say to that is that, and so this is something I've like kind of struggled with on a personal level a lot, is like the Bitcoin's goal and the reason that people think it's working has been revised. It's like I think that it has been revised scientifically, like, and correctly, like, ultimately, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't revised. And like the question here is like, when did it happen and like why? So like one of the things that I don't
it was
really,
money.
What did you say?
It was peer-to-peer cash.
Yeah, that was the original. Well, as Roger points out with his white paper, right? He sort of like highlights the title, and he's like, "This is the title."
Over and
right?
over.
Yeah, but he has a point, right? So I mean, as someone who like, I don't write anymore for CoinDesk, right? I mostly like sort of manage the staff and like kind of like try to shepherd the brand. But like when I wrote, just during the Bitcoin scaling wars, it was like that's sort of like the time I spent there. And the question I keep going back to there is like, where did some of these ideologies? It's amazing how quickly some of them like came about. So I'll give you an example. Like, so you've probably been told by people that like everyone in Bitcoin, like the goal is for everyone to run a node, and that's sort of like that is our definition of decentralization, and that is what we believe is the key differentiator of Bitcoin, is that you'll ultimately be able to audit the blockchain, and you'll be able to audit it by holding a copy of the blockchain.
Well, yeah, so that came in my interview with Luke Dash Jr. the other day,
Yeah.
and he said, and then I brought it up with Adam
But
back
he,
and Brian
he
Bishop.
was the one who, so Luke is the one who really like was the foundational like person of that, because the UASF, which is the user activated soft fork, was that crystallized that ideology. But I would say, I would go so far as to say, like, even 4 weeks prior to that, that was like not a thing. Like that came about so quickly and crystallized so thoroughly, like in a way that I can't even like really express to you just like how quickly that happened.
But it's not even practical right now. So I raised it with Adam Back and Brian Bishop. I just said, look, I've got a lot of normal friends who aren't into Bitcoin, and
Right.
even getting them to consider just opening a coin-based wallet,
Right.
and just buying some is a hard sell. Try and get them to set up a node. I mean, it's virtually impossible right now.
Sure, and that's like why a lot of people are going the alternative route, right? But I think like Bitcoin ultimately came to that decision. They're choosing to stick with that, and like, is that, so the question there would be like, is that true? Is it a true thing that like to be decentralized, like one has to have a copy of the full blockchain? And like the question that I would have as someone who's a journalist, and again like why I believe more like less in sort of like a pure objective truth, is I don't think that there's any way that could possibly be a true or false statement. Like what about that could possibly be true? It's just an opinion that you have. And like, I do agree that like on a technological level, like if you don't hold the full copy of the blockchain, then you're right. Like what is the difference between the structure that you have now, where it's like the bank like kind of like holds that ledger system, but it's still hard to tell, like to treat that as a fact. Because in the market, it might not win out. Like maybe people will just decide en masse that they just like don't really care about that. Like maybe they can get the benefits of the thing through something else. Like
But even exploring these things are difficult. They come with challenges. For example, I know this. I'm already thinking right now. Right, when this interview goes out, there are going to be certain people who are going to listen to it who are going to have a pop at me. They're going to say, "Why are you saying this? Or you still don't understand Bitcoin?"
Well, I would frame it as we're talking about the nature of sort of like truth in the cryptocurrency industry, and like how you properly explore that. And I guess maybe to comment on that a little bit, it's like and this is something in the design decision of CoinDesk. Like I think it's because I've been like a stakeholder in that for a while. It's like, I think CoinDesk gets a lot of flack for like not presenting like a holistic version of the truth. Like we're not like a truth portal. Like you don't go to us to like get like a certain, and we don't provide that. That's like, I don't think something that we've tried to like avoid doing. But people want that.
But that's the journalism you get in North Korea.
What do you mean?
Well, a dictatorship telling you what you should believe, rather than freedom to report on whatever you choose.
Right. And I think like people, what I guess I'm trying to say about that is that like we have tried to do that. Like so personally, I would say that like during the scaling stuff, it's like I was like personally pretty biased towards like the people who were like the developers. Like so, I was probably one of the only journalists who like talked to the business people and the miners and the developers. And I was biased towards the developers because like I understood what they were trying to do. I understood why the other people's motivations were different. But like, there were certain things you had to take all of those viewpoints seriously up until a point that someone won, right? So like we would do stuff like SegWit 2x comes out. Here's what the businesses think. Here's what the miners think. Here's what the developers think. And the reason that is because ultimately like I've wanted people to come to CoinDesk to like get their own opinion about things.
Well, if you Venn diagram them all with kind of like, I don't know, financial incentive, best for Bitcoin, best for like decentralized, I would have thought the developers are the ones who are going to be least motivated and incentivized by financial gain of what they're doing. Whereas the miners and almost certainly the businesses, whilst they talk about wanting to break the deadlock, they're incentivized.
Well, they want to exit. Like, yeah, that's the joke of the whole thing, and that's where it became really obvious. One of the questions. So I met Greg Maxwell once. He was at one of the early CoinDesk conferences, and I asked him. I was like, "Do you care if Bitcoin like succeeds during your lifetime? Like, do you care if you see this thing actually become what you want it to be?" And he said, "No." And I think I view the people in Bitcoin as like, the vision that the way that I sort of explain it to people is, the developers view Bitcoin as a once in a human history chance to cull back money creation from governments. And they take that shit super seriously, and they should. And I think that was the ideology that won out of the scaling debate.
Yeah, but that sometimes what you've said there is, I think, a reflection on maybe why there are quote-unquote toxic people within the community putting pressure on someone like me because they think, or yourself, because they think perhaps your work.
So this is what I was talking about, ideological like chasms, right? So like within Twitter is the problem, because what happens is like, people get out there and you're incentivized, like, so, and Pompliano is like and I've actually told him this, so I don't feel bad about saying this, but in order to get your message out on Twitter, you need to be consistent, condensed, and you need to be like, always be saying the same thing. Like Pomp is a Hallmark card. Like you like, he's a fortune cookie you open every day to make yourself feel good about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And that's great. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't like provide like an actual real school of thought. So what you get is that like, these little pockets come up where you're just like, constantly reinforcing the same idea. And this is what I was saying again about like, the atrophy of intellect, right? It's like, how do you get to a point where, you can stay nimble in an environment that is like constantly changing? And I think not a lot of people have done that like very well. And that's why I feel like, the tendency for people to come and they just like assume that the Twitter sphere is like, like a rational place to get information. It's just, I don't know.
And also, I think like every year new people come in, it's so hard to get up to speed. You feel like you have to learn the history. It's almost like it's almost like you come in and your brain becomes your Bitcoin node, and you have to like soak up these 10 years of knowledge.
Totally true. And that's what I say to people. They ask me about like CoinDesk or like how I became like a journalist or like whatever, and I'm just saying like there's nothing special about me. I've just like been here for a long time. Like, I actually believe that. I don't really think that there's, like, if you dropped me from, like, 2013 into now, I'd probably be Ben Munster or, like, something like that, right? I just, like, wouldn't, like, I would, I'd try to specialize, and I would just, like, wouldn't, but the difference with me is, like, I've been doing it for, like, 6 years. I have, like, this vantage point that, like, right now is, like, probably, like, kind of unique, but that's not, like, to give myself a compliment. I don't like.
Like, sometimes I think perhaps if you're a dev or one of these hardcore Bitcoiners, it's sometimes easy just to stake your position and stay there and just say, right, this is where I am. I'm Bitcoin only. I'm going to support and fight for Bitcoin. Whereas perhaps if you're a journalist, you've had to look at things. You get bashed around so much that it's very hard to then suddenly anchor yourself to something unless you do it out of pressure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess journalists, I really think, shouldn't, like, anchor themselves to things. I think you want to, like, advance the story through storytelling. That's what we've tried to kind of prioritize at CoinDesk. The question is, like, how do you do that on, like, technology reporting in cryptocurrencies? That's something, like, I'd like to spend more time on, because I think that's like, really hard. How do you actually kind of, like, report on, like, what's going on with these things? I feel like people just don't appreciate that, like, cryptocurrency journalism is always very new. Like, there's a tendency for people to treat CoinDesk as, like, this weird sort of, like, I think people get so mad that, like, we don't cover, like, everything under the sun, and we're a business, like, we're staffed by humans, like, and we just, like, have not that much time to do things, and it's, like, we're not this, like, sort of, like, infallible thing. Like, people have always, like, sort of, and that's why I say, like, the irony with CoinDesk is like we're just as bad of a business as like all the other businesses in the space, which are just all kind of like,
I think CoinDesk has been, certainly for the last 18 months, has been pretty solid. I mean, I don't read everything because there's a lot I'm not interested in, but the stuff I am interested in is pretty solid reporting. It's pretty solid journalism. The facts are stated. You bring in the correct quotes. You reference the right articles. When I read it, it's pretty. I mean, I was using it this morning when I was publishing my Daniel Buckner article about Microsoft.
Right.
I was using your article because it was a very solid starting point for me to do my write-up. So I do think it's pretty solid. There are some titles out there I think are shocking. I'm not going to name them, but there are some that are shocking. It's not actually the block though. Actually, I actually like some of their work. The paywall now is frustrating, but I do like some of their work. I used to read it religiously as well. My impression, like, to the rise of crypto journalism recently is like I can't believe the sector became so overcapitalized. It's just shocking to me that like so many people are trying to like disrupt CoinDesk. Like it's just like it's such an odd thing because we struggled for so long to make CoinDesk like work as a business. Like myself personally, like I think I told this on Charlie Shrem's podcast like recently. It's like original CoinDesk, like it died. Like I watched that company die. Like we sold the rest of our assets. Like I remember that, and like when I saw all these things come out, I was like literally shocked. Like I didn't like tweet about it or do anything at the time, but like Breaker Mag, it's like which is the one that famously closed like recently, was run off like the surplus of a token that they like
put out there, and I was like, how does anybody expect that they're going to make a business out of this? Like media and content is like one of the worst business models, and there's nothing about blockchain that changes it. It's the same business model. Like we're like CoinDesk is a business the way that TechCrunch or Rolling Stone or like whatever's a business. We're a digital media publisher. There's nothing about you covering blockchain that like makes your business like innately better. So like when I saw these things, I was just like, oh man, like this sucks. Like it sucks because these kids are gonna buy into it. They're gonna work really hard. They're gonna like burn themselves out, and then their business is gonna run out of money. And that's the thing where at some point within CoinDesk, it's like, I feel like I would have loved to have like stayed a journalist, like, Ben Munster or somebody like write things that I think are fun and like funny. And it's like, at some point, it's like, you have to make CoinDesk a business. Like it had to work. So for my standpoint, it's like, I thought that something like CoinDesk should exist. So I worked really hard to try to like make it still exist.
But where do you make money? Your options. You've got ads, which don't work, and they're very, very low revenue.
Conferences.
Which,
yours
obviously does.
As soon as we started making money, everybody wanted to criticize. And then, the other one is do subscriptions, which I think is insane. I don't actually know why you would want to do that or who would pay for that. I just think it's a bad business model. And when I look at these things, I get really frustrated because, it's like, I wish people had the perspective of like kind of going through it. It's like where it's like CoinDesk spent $5 million, ended up with nothing. And you're like, okay, well, you can't run your business off. So with the original CoinDesk, like I go back and I look at it, and it's so funny to me now. The team was like 14 people. We were making no money. Like we were making no money, and we just thought we would keep raising rounds. Like the analogy about the frog in the pot where it's like just boils.
Keeps warming.
And like now my ideology is like, people just like sometimes they don't like working with me. Why? Because it's like I come from a time in which I watched a business literally fall apart and like no one cared. And no one even knew, and that's what's so strange about it, And it's like I don't know. I found it really hard to divorce myself from that experience.
What was the jump from it falling apart to carrying on again?
Consensus,
right? But so what? Financed by Barry.
Well, no. So, like, I would say, like, the original CoinDesk, just to get all the facts, like, properly out there. So, like, we were founded by this guy named Shaquille Khan, who was an angel investor. It was the head of product at Spotify, maybe still is. Like, we raised an original round, like, because he was like an early investor. He was one of the first investors in BitPay, and BitPay was, like, one of the first big VC investments. So he was an investor in that. So we raised some money. We grew the team to like 14, 15 people. And then basically we turned on advertising and thought we were going to make a ton of money. Didn't. Sort of ran out of steam there. So June is like one of my colleagues, like he came in and decided to do the conference, which was Consensus. We threw it. It was very successful. And then the next day we were like, oh my God, we have to put up $1.5 million to run another conference. So our business is done. And this was at the end of 2015. Bitcoin was $230, right? When we wound down that company with my CEO at the time, this guy named Jeremy, like I sold 300 Bitcoins with him at like $230, like, to liquidate the entity. And then like there was only so many people who would buy us at the time, right? So like I think it was like Bitcoin Magazine, and like Barry was one of the people, I think, who's that guy? Trace Mayer, I think, was like one of the people. Like there was just like, there was just nobody. There was very few people who would give us a home. The synergy with DCG was they had enough money to help us throw another event, and they had an event team. Like they were trying to actually throw events, so that there was a good synergy there.
Do you think you need the magazine? I'll call it magazine, the website. But do you think you need the magazine and the events? Do you think like?
Can you divide those two things?
I mean, I'm saying, could you just have the events? Or
well, I think anything can just live on its own. Like so there's business models for everything, right? It's like Money 2020 doesn't have like a media website attached to it, and that's like, I'm not convinced that the current model of CoinDesk is going to be like an end all be all sort of thing. We have something that it works. Like the conference funds the news outlet, and that seems good. That's not maybe necessarily like our end all be all goal or whatever, but it was like. You try for so hard to get something that's working, and then you get your new questions from there. But
because I've denied with like, what do I do next?
Oh, with your podcast,
because I've always been an entrepreneur. And I like to grow things, and I'm like, what's the next? I'm always what's the next. I'm not going to sit here and do it for 5 years.
So I can tell you, like like with my view with CoinDesk, and I be sort of. Kind of always like sort of had this idea of like what it should be, and it's funny when I look at the other media publications out there because I look at them and I see them go down paths where I was like, oh, I thought about that, and like I'm glad that's as terrible as like I thought it was because the stupid, like, and I'm glad I didn't do that. For me, it was basically like it's a market, it's a 24-hour market, everyone has access to it, and I think there is room for like probably one very large like media outlet that can be 24/7 and that can hold that market accountable. But like for me, it was sort of like. to create a global brand, there are certain sacrifices you have to make, right? And one of the things with like me and Stan, who are the two writers that came over in the DCG acquisition, like, you know, we sat down and we wrote every other crypto journalist on a piece of white paper, and we were like, how the fuck are we going to scale this? Because like, you know, there's like 10 people here, right? So how are you going to build like a global news outlet? So, you know, we've had to do things that like I think people don't like think about it all, like, which is like, you know, we have a writer training program. We can take someone with a journalism degree and we can help them become like someone who's like educated about the space and like advance their career. And like now we have, you know, something where we have like a bunch of documentation, like here's the things that like we expect you to do as like an editor, like all our positions are like documented, right? And I look at some of the other startups and it's like, I can tell they're working 12 hours a day, that it's like just them doing it and it's like life or death for them. And it's like, okay, great. And it's great content for people, but it's like, you're going to kill yourselves. And for what? And it's like, you know, I can tell you that the other side of that is, you know, I think CoinDesk is in a good position to get an opportunity out of this that and can survive long term. But having like run the gauntlet of that, I you know, as I said, it may sound condescending. Like, I don't know. This is why I sort of haven't like really spoken about this, because I don't want to sound condescending. It's just that like having like gone through the shit of like making a media business that has money, like it's just not a fun thing, you know. So I look at Decrypt, I look at Breaker, I look at, you know, The Block, and I look at these other things, and I go, you know, that sucks. Like, why? Like, I hope it works out for you, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Decrypt are funded by Joe Lubin, so
well, like, so like the media business model is such that all media outlets now are mostly funded by like trusts. Like, I mean, the Washington Post is like funded by Jeff Bezos, like, right? So like media as a thing isn't well funded because you have the internet behemoths of like, you're really writing for Google, Twitter, and like these information aggregators, right? So that's why I said there's nothing about blockchain that like changed the business model. So there's only a few ways you can monetize it. I think some of the other ones there are interesting, but I think, you know, with CoinDesk, it's like I'm glad we did the conference route. I think it has its own unique challenges, and I think consensus is a beast, and every year I dread, like, you know, the coming of it, you know, because it is such a just gigantic thing. But, you know, I'm happy we did it. I'm glad it worked, and I'm glad that we are no longer fighting for our survival in the way that we used to, and that, like, you know, I think I'm almost to the point where I think this thing can like run. It can just like be a thing forever that the space has, and that's good. Like, even if I'm not a part of it, and I think that's like, you know, another thing when Ryan came in, like initially, Ryan Selkis from Astari, he was like our original managing director. He was like, oh, you guys should like write things all the time, and you guys should like make yourselves look really cool by like writing cool things. And I was like, okay, well, that's not a business. Like, that's not a thing. Like, and we could have done that. We made fun of him. We called it Jean Jacket CoinDesk, which is like, we would go out on Twitter all the time and like make fun of people and like.
But in the end, you need a business model. I mean, like, so the Block, I might do this, doesn't get upset by me saying this, but they've done a very good job of creating a splash by creating a lot of noise, getting in the drama. And I've experienced that myself, so I would be a hypocrite to say I've not been in the middle of it. But at the end of the day, none of this really matters if you haven't got a business model.
Your words, not mine.
But no, but it doesn't. I mean, so I look at Decrypt and think, well, you're in the same position as Breaker.
Right.
If somebody turns off the tap, you're done.
Right. Yeah.
I look at the likes of, I mean, I don't read many, but I look at you guys, I think, well, you've got consensus, so you're fine.
For now.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, who knows how long that'll last.
But you have. And actually, I think the two go hand in hand very well.
You know, I look at it as like
think of it like this. Okay. Why does Pomp do his podcast?
Because he has a fund.
He has a fund. He created a media company on top of a fund that.
No, he just has a podcast, and that's like a product of like, you know, the social media and the internet being accessible, and that's great. And like, you know, there's no.
That's great for the fund. And what I'm saying is, I think having CoinDesk helps consensus.
As the conference.
Yeah,
of course. Yeah, for sure. Like, the two go hand in hand. The way I would rationalize that would basically be like, you know, we bring people give us their best understanding of the industry. We turn that into articles, and then the events is sort of like the physical forum for that. I'd like to see CoinDesk, and I think right now we have the opportunity to like move into other like parts. I think there are some exponential opportunities that are still available to a company like ours that has capital. And I think we can go after them. So that's exciting to me.
You should buy my podcast. It's highly successful.
We'll talk about it with.
No, but I'm just saying that, like, so that's another area where there is an opportunity. Like the podcast media or the visual media, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, we've been a bit slow on that. Again, like I think, I've had a lot of time to think about like how to do like the cryptocurrency journalism thing. Again, not trying to be like sound like pompous here or whatever, but there was a lot of like emphasis in 2017, like when things were really going well, like suggesting that we should build a lot of layers on CoinDesk. And this is also going to like probably make me sound stupid, but it's like I think like the Bitcoin model is like one of the things that like really inspired me about the way they look at like how to build that network. Is I've always tried to like think about CoinDesk from like a perspective of like, hey, how can I ensure that this like continues to operate? Like one of the things that like I think a lot of people don't think about is like the tremendous turnover that CoinDesk has gone over, and like the way that product quality has stayed the same, even though like so many people have left over the years. Like I mean, I've worked with like 20, 30 people like over the years, and like it works because it's a system. We're not dependent on like one person. Like if you're a flagship, like I would ask you about these other like outlets. It's like if their best reporter left, like what would they have? And I think like we've gone through that. We've created a system that goes over that. But so what you were saying is sort of like building podcast video. I think we would have done really well in the last run, but it's like you go back to aggregation again, and it's like at some point somebody has to pay the cost to produce news. Like somebody has to actually produce it. Like it's costly to produce news. It's easy to do a podcast about somebody else's news, and I want CoinDesk to bear the capital costs of producing more of that news, and I want that to be the thing that like we do well over time, because I think that can be the real differentiator. I don't think we've always gotten it. And I actually don't even think that CoinDesk has always been good. Like I've been at the iterations of CoinDesk that I thought were very bad, and I think like looking back are dumb, and that's fine. But it's
well, like I said to you, I mean, the last year to 18 months, I noticed a definite difference between prior to Consensus 2018, post Consensus 2018.
Oh, okay.
I can't.
Well, because we brought in a lot of people, right? And I think
because I can't put my finger on why, but there's something changed for me.
Yeah, we brought in a lot of people, and I think like we bulked up the model. Like so, in the end of 2017, the staff was probably like 7 or 8 people, like who had been mostly going full speed for a long time, and then we had to sort of adjust to like, okay, how do we run a bigger model? But like what's funny is like the team from 2017, like that was small, that was like 6 or 7 people, versus the team now that's like 15 people. Like that small team was like 70% as productive as the big team. Because when you have a big team, you have like young people who need to learn, and like, God, you've gone through all this like fucking learning process. You know like what a fucking terrible mess it is, right? So it's like, how do you protect people from that while they learn so that they can actually like do good work, right? So, I think we've gotten to the point where I think CoinDesk can be, like, my question now is like, how do we go from like 20 to 80? How do we go from 80 to like 100? Because like, I would like to see CoinDesk be like a large thing. I'm not really interested in us being like super cool on Twitter. Do
you think it always stays encrypted?
What?
Do you think it's always rooted in
For
crypto?
sure, 100%.
Okay.
We've gone through the gauntlet of that choice also. I look back at the rooms where I was in with CoinDesk, and I'm like, oh, okay, like, well, I remember being in the room where we're like, should we cover other assets that aren't Bitcoin? Like, I remember being in a room where we're like, oh, we should get out of the data product because blockchain.info is so great. And you go back to these decisions, and like some of them are just dumb. You're like, wow, that's like the dumbest thing that I've ever heard. And there's one like, oh, we should do fintech. And it's like, no one cares about fintech.
Well, I'll tell you weighs heavily on my mind, because this is a new job industry for me.
Yeah, sure.
A few years ago I was working in advertising, and now I'm here as maybe a journalist, but a podcaster, I would say, is a fair description. And
I honestly, I was really impressed with the way you came up with things. The fact that you have advertisers and stuff.
I have a background in sales and marketing.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a digital agency, so I know how to build a website. I know how to build a brand. I know how to sell.
Right.
But what I think about, because you've got to think ahead, I think about what happens in 2 years if all these protocols start to die. Nobody's using them. They all start to die off, close down. I mean, we've lost a few, right? What if it just keeps happening and the business just moves towards primarily Bitcoin, maybe a couple of other things? What I think about then is like, where's your revenue model?
Well, so I think like, here's how I would say that the market is overwhelmingly biased at this point to the creation of new cryptocurrencies. Whether or not those work out, everyone in the industry benefits from there being more than one cryptocurrency. Literally everyone.
Of course.
Like,
I mean,
the exchanges,
yeah.
the businesses. The only people who don't benefit from there being more than Bitcoin, like, are the Bitcoiners, like the people who are like the developers and the people who are hardcore into it. That doesn't make the other things correct. It just states that And I've called this like the Barry Silbert, Joe Lubin problem. It's like it's always better to be the Baron on your own blockchain. So it's like if you're Joe Lubin, why didn't you build on Bitcoin? Well, it's because you can be Joe Lubin on Ethereum. Or if you're, Charles Hodgkinson, like why aren't you building on Joe Lubin's like blockchain? Well, because you can be Charles Hodgkinson on your own blockchain. So it's like the market seems to have an overwhelming bias towards like new cryptocurrencies, and I don't think that's going to go away because I think like the gains of like. This is how I would express this. Like, the more Bitcoin does better, the more the bounty on the head of like taking it out is. And like what that means is that capital is going to continue to fund alternatives because the greatest yield is there. And like with the tendency of Bitcoiners just look at that as stupid and like they're like, oh, these people are wasting their money, and maybe they are. But I think Ariel Deschapelle, I don't know if you've read him, he's like a Bitcoin developer / maximalist guy, but he sort of says this. It's like even if like the market is right now is just sort of like funding every idea that's not Bitcoin and all those things die, it still needs to go through that process because like that's how you objectively find out. Like it's sort of like exploring the earth. It's like, how did they know that there wasn't more land? Well, they went everywhere and there was no more land. Like, so we're sort of doing that with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies now. And it's like, where's the land? I don't know. How much more land is there? I don't know. There could be a whole new world out there. So many,
behind the big ice wall at the edge of
the edge of where the water falls off in the sea monster, right? Yeah. So the edge of the map, right? So
edge
like,
of the map.
So like, well, there's always going to be those explorers, right?
Yeah, possibly. But I also think that it gets to the point whereby people kind of realize that these things aren't going to work. And perhaps the money doesn't go into it. The investment money doesn't go into it because it's only. I think there's too much of a downside risk. Like, how many times do you have to get burnt?
Well, I don't know. I think how I would explain that is like from my perspective of being here for a while is I think that the thesis of investors actually hasn't changed too much. I think there was Bitcoin first, and what they thought was that the network effects of Bitcoin were such that it would never be displaced. Ethereum happened, and then once you have two things, the question is, why not 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15? Because when you have two, the question is, why not 5,000? And like, you don't really know what's going to happen from that. But again, capital is going to be biased towards maximum appreciation, so it's going to continue to go in that direction. And I do believe that, personally, I think the verdict's still out on Ethereum until they get a proof of stake. They get a proof of stake. That is a magnificent achievement, and it should be applauded. I think even if you're a Bitcoin maximalist and you're listening to this, like I think like if they get to that point and they make that work, well, what are you going to say then?
Well,
I think you give them a round of applause. Like,
I mean, perhaps my measure for Ethereum would be when isn't almost like the Joe Lubin Jimmy Song bet. Like, show me the usage. Where's value being created? Where's stuff being built?
I think even if Vitalik has only succeeded at encouraging I think Vitalik, he did a few things that are really important that weren't technological based. Is that he made it okay to question the Bitcoin orthodoxy. Like he made that okay. He sort of like opened up this field of exploration and sort of like chipped away at the sort of. I think Vitalik's contributions to the cryptocurrency industry are as much cultural as they are technological. Even if he only by like kind of showing the way that you could do something else or think differently, he created like a mass of entrepreneurs and developers who could go in that direction. I still think that's so influential. Like, I mean, that even if it goes nowhere, it's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I mean,
like, do you want to live in a world where like there was Bitcoin and like then no one bothered to like try to make anything else?
I mean,
like is that what you're like? Oh, Bitcoin's here. I mean, okay, great.
I don't know either way. Like, I mean, if Bitcoin just works and does what it does, that's fine. That's great. Yeah. If people come along and challenge and try and build something better, my problem with this trying to build a better Bitcoin is I can't see anyone beating the things that are most important to me.
Well, but I think Bitcoin is like it's narrowed. It's come to a very strong and well thought out value proposition. I think other cryptocurrencies will go through this iteration process. You're seeing Ethereum go from like, okay, they started out trying to be the world computer. They're going to narrow that back towards something. But I think they're going to narrow it back towards probably something that works. Bitcoin started out trying to be electronic cash. They sort of narrowed it back to sort of, this is the store value, right? This is the unbreakable, unkillable store value that will live forever. I think that was good. I think it's good to see these cryptocurrency things sort of like pivoting and finding niches that aren't so defined by their original destinations, right? I think that's the criticism of like Roger. It's that he's so obsessed with the original destination that he doesn't even bother to see like what value has been created out of rejecting it, which is a lot. Like I think, for me, I look at it as I see Bitcoin as like the nature state of money. Like no one likes natural law. It's like if I stab you, you're going to die. That's natural law. It's not very friendly. I'm sure it doesn't make you feel good like me saying that, but that is natural law. If you get hit by a plane, like you're dead. That's natural law. Bitcoin wants to operate in that setting, right? It wants to be uncorruptible. It wants no one to be able to shut it down. It wants to be forever, and that's great. It just that we don't live in a world that's totally defined by natural law. We're wearing clothes right now.
Yeah.
Not different than your podcast with John Seth and DeRose, but but what I mean by that, I guess,
we
is
can take our shirts off if you want. But I think it's a bit late.
Your podcast, I would encourage you to get your own shtick there.
Yeah, that was for them. I think that was to. It was the perfect way to start that show.
Yeah.
Look, I agree, but I mean, Bitcoin. I think it is important for me. Some of the key things it has, which do differentiate itself, which you can't recreate. You can't recreate the birth of Bitcoin. Really, you would struggle. Yeah, it's been attempted with Grin,
but you can't.
And with Monero.
You eat like.
But I think that's really important.
I have problems with can'ts. Like so.
Okay.
What I would say is that we should always encourage an environment in which if someone tells you can't do something, someone should try to disprove that.
Actually, and you're right, because that's exactly what I say to my children.
And we as like humans should want that. And that's why I have trouble with ideologies. Like I'm not a person who like naturally likes ideologies, because if my inclination is if you start a sentence and you say, okay, this will never happen, you should go, why? And then you should throw a lot of money at like trying to do that other thing.
No, you're totally right. I had it recently with my son. He's come back from school. He's got a drama piece to do, and the piece he wants to do is a historical monologue which is based during the slave era of the US. I think it's post-slave era, but still racial undertones. And he said, I might not be able to do it because, I have to say certain words which kind of come across as racist, and there's, kids at school might be offended, and so he said, I might not be able to do it. And I actually said to him, no, if they tell you no, you need to challenge them, because this is a piece of creative work. You're not out there being a racist. You're trying to express...
Quentin Tarantino gets away with it.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, so no, you are right. Sorry, you're right. So I think the point I'm trying to make, it's very hard to create that. It's going to be very hard because it was like an immaculate concept. Like Dan Hill says.
The Bitcoiners, the people whoever built Bitcoin, whoever it is, I personally don't care. I do not give a fuck who Satoshi is.
Well, they should give a fuck who he isn't.
I think it was a better world where Craig Wright is Satoshi, but we can debate that.
Really?
Yes.
And now we need to Okay, let's come back to that.
I'll just give a quick answer there. It's a better world because Satoshi exists and no one cares. And for me, that's the way things should be.
No, I disagree. Because to me it's a lie and it's a long con, and people will be ripped off and defrauded based on it.
I think you're misinterpreting that a little bit. So what I'm saying is that I think what is the optimal scenario is where the world that doesn't care who Satoshi is, because we don't need Satoshi. Us knowing who Satoshi is provides next to no value about the technology.
I totally agree.
So therefore, my argument about it would be great if it was Craig Wright is because it seems like Craig Wright is unable to prove that he's actually Satoshi if he is.
But he actually keeps proving that he isn't.
Whatever you want to think about that, sure. But I'm saying, if you were to live in a world in which Satoshi doesn't matter and is discredited, then I think that's good.
Gosh, I would need time to consume that and actually kind of think about that with a piece of paper and a pen, because anyway.
Sure.
Anyway,
move along.
Nice socks, by the way, bro.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, Monero. Yeah. Which is, again, it's socially acceptable for me to wear these for reasons that I can't explain.
Yeah. It's kind of anti-privacy wearing Monero socks, though.
Yeah, I guess, sure.
It's
you can't frisk me for Monero, that's what I say.
Stick them up. Where's your Monero?
Where were you going, though? I felt like we were going somewhere. You had a train of thought you were going before I derailed you with Craig.
No. I just, Dan Hill's article on Bitcoin's Immaculate Conception, I think is a super important article. I think the recreation of that is very difficult. Yes, it might be able to be done, but it's done at a time where cryptocurrencies now exist. It was done at a time where
nothing can be what Bitcoin is, but that doesn't mean other things can't be like Bitcoin, and that's
of course. But building a better Bitcoin for me has never been
not about building a better Bitcoin.
Well, okay, building a better cryptocurrency, whatever. To me, it's never been about building something that's technically better. Okay, because a lot of the things about Bitcoin don't come down to the technology.
The thing that Bitcoin is trying to achieve will only and can only be achieved by Bitcoin. That does in no way means that the other blockchains cannot succeed with the unique value propositions, because it is such that like operating some of these things could be cheap and that you could still exchange things. They just won't be like what. That's why I sort of said like natural law, right? It's like to me, Bitcoin's success is if it's the zero state, and that because it is uncorruptible and it's unkillable, you can build all these other things off of it.
Yeah, I'm waiting for proof now, though. So when I was very new and early, I was like, oh, this is a new technical innovation. It's going to be like the birth of the internet. You know, there will be a lot of failures and some successes. Well, let's wait and see. I'm now in a different position because at the birth of the internet, there were a lot of things that were still successful. Here, we still only have arguably one success, and that's still got a lot to prove. Nothing else to me is actually...
What do you mean, sorry?
Like, so, you know, lots of companies were created during the dot-com boom that still exist today.
Yeah, but you get weird things like, so pets.com failed, but chewy.com is doing very well. It is a great company.
But what I'm saying, there's lots of successes.
Yeah.
It's more than one. It's not like we just got Google and everything else has failed.
Well, but like, look at that thing, right? So pets.com was a meme. It's like, oh, is Bitcoin going to be the pets.com? And like, you know, I was thinking about this the other day. My girlfriend loves chewy.com. She's like, oh, I love this business. It's great. And like, I'm like, oh, okay, well, so then somebody just made another pets.com and it seems to be doing quite well. So it's like, you can't, all I'm saying is that it's very dangerous in the space, I think, for anyone to just be like, okay, well, like we live in a world where we absolutely know like where this is going to go.
No, I just think what I'm saying is that the analogy is bad. And perhaps Bitcoin is the internet and it's the things built on Bitcoin which
or just
will
like
have
the
the successes
Bitcoin
and
is.
failures.
You ever heard that, the Beauty On guy?
Yeah, I struggle with him.
Oh, I like Beauty On.
Oh, no, I like him, but like sometimes I have to just... I've talked to him over DMs and sometimes I have to like take a step back.
Well, because his Bitcoin is like sort of ideology was like very important, I think. He was able to properly express like that Bitcoin didn't need to confide or conform to like any pre-existing conception of itself.
Yeah,
which I think is good. And I think he taught people a lot with that.
Every time I talk to him, though, I walk away feeling like I've got everything wrong in life.
Sure. I mean, my thing is that I just think that, you know, everyone has a place in the industry, and it's fine to like, you know, like advocate for your brand or ideology, and like you have that in life also, right? I just think that myself personally, it's like I sort of operate a platform in which I see these ideologies compete. That's sort of like the goal. If like CoinDesk is successful, then sort of ideologies should be able to compete there in like sort of in semi-natural state. And I just try that. I try to think of like, you know, just think about the opposite. Put yourself in the shoes of the other person. And I think, you know, there's a lot I like about Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin. I think it's great. I think that other things, you know, might exist. And
I'll tell you my measure.
That's also great. Like,
no, I'll tell you my measure now because I sold everything apart from Bitcoin. And the reason is I use Bitcoin. I use it multiple times per month. I issue invoices.
Yeah.
I get paid, but I also give people...
Yeah, but there's no reason that you couldn't do that in any of the other cryptocurrencies, to be 100% honest with you.
Yeah, of course. But
there's nothing special about that.
But so we go to network effect. Bitcoin is the most liquid asset of them all. It's the most reliable.
Could change at any time.
Yeah, but it hasn't. So at the moment, Bitcoin is, for me, is the safest and best one to use. And it's the one I choose to. Everybody pretty much has a Bitcoin wallet.
But those all could change like at some point.
It could, but right now it hasn't, and therefore that's the one I own because I have a use for it. I've looked at everything else. I don't have a single use for anything else. That's not to say I won't in the future.
And I think many people will say the same thing about Facebook Coin when it comes out.
That might be slightly different. It depends how they do it. I mean, if they just create Venmo with a blockchain over Facebook Messenger then and WhatsApp, then people probably are going to use it. You know, they could have like a dollar wallet and just use it. But we've got to see what they bring out with it. Nobody knows really.
Again, I don't think anything will replace Bitcoin. Bitcoin's goal now is to exist and continue to exist and to continue to withstand any possible threat. That does not mean these other things are not interesting. That does not mean many people won't use them. I think both of those worlds can simultaneously exist. I think you can have a world in which Bitcoin is succeeding in its value proposition and Facebook Coin is like wildly successful. I don't know why people get so like, you know, they're not able to handle like sort of this multiple dichotomy like of things. I think that's like a fine and future state. Like,
I think they are. I think the ones who aren't tend to be that noisy minority who make a lot of noise.
I think because Bitcoin was first, it's sort of like saddled with the expectations of being everything. Like everything that has ever been possible with a blockchain is sort of like condensed into Bitcoin. You see this when like Nathaniel Popper publishes an article or whatever. He's like, Bitcoin failing to become a medium of exchange means that Facebook is like, it's like, and it's like, no, Bitcoin will survive and it's doing its thing and that's great. And these other things are doing well and that's great, or their ideas and that's great and that's fine. Like Bitcoin suffers a lot, and I feel like the community or people around Bitcoin, they're very defensive because Bitcoin is constantly held up to this impossible standard of needing to be every possible idea for everybody. Oh, well, the banks are going to use Bitcoin. Well, it's like, blah, blah, blah.
That Nathaniel Popper article really surprised me. I held him in a higher regard before. I mean, I have not changed my opinion. I like him. I really enjoyed his book.
He's very good when he is breaking news that moves the market forward, because he had a tremendous platform for that, being at the New York Times. I think some of the stuff that he's done, like the Mike Hearn article, like I was not a huge fan of. But again, Bitcoin is like a cultural thing. It takes a lot of time to understand Bitcoin.
I know. That did surprise me. It was almost like you could put Paul Vigner's name on it, and I'd have gone, yeah, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, sure. I like Paul.
I mean,
I like Paul better than Nathaniel.
I mean, it's not about liking or not liking. I'll stick to their work because I've never met either of them. Okay. But in terms of
Paul was you missed peak Paul. Peak Paul was like 2013, 2014. He also has the best quote about Bitcoin that I think I've ever heard, which is, "Nobody sings songs about PayPal," which is my favorite quote about the space.
Yeah, I mean, I don't sing songs about Bitcoin.
People did, but that's one of the...
But I don't care. I mean, I'll just go based on the work. I went into the archives of the Wall Street Journal, went to the archives, I searched for Paul Vigner, I searched for Bitcoin. I think of 22 articles, 21 were negative, something like that. So I just, out of interest, did another search for Ripple, and I found 3 neutral to positive articles. And that, to me, at that very point, at that very instance, you've lost all credibility to me, because what you've done is you have proven a journalistic bias, and that you are in that. So the journalistic bias is either, and I can't prove any of this, that the Ripple articles are press releases and you're paid for those, or you're clickbaiting with Bitcoin, so because you know a negative article will get more people to read it. Either way, I kind of don't give a fuck what you do anymore. And he's contacted me a couple of times about wanting to do a piece, and every time I'm like, no, I'm not gonna talk to you or work with you until you have objectively fair Bitcoin reporting. Until then, basically, you can fuck off.
That's fair.
I mean, you guys don't just sit and write negative Bitcoin articles all day, because you know there's 2 sides of the story. You'll report accurately.
If that's what people believe, then that's great.
That's what I believe. I like your stuff.
Yeah.
Man, we crashed through an hour there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I got to get to this CoinDesk party. So,
well, listen, look, I want to say thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
short notice.
I hope it was good.
That was awesome. Where do you want people to go? This is how we always finish it.
Keep if you want to go to CoinDesk.com. I mean, obviously we're putting out news there. If you want to like attack CoinDesk for like valid reasons to prove like an intellectual point, that's like also great. Money Triggs is a great example of that. Love that guy. If you like, and again, attack CoinDesk if you want to put like use CoinDesk to get your thing out there, your viewpoint. That's also fine too. So
the weathered crypto journalist.
There's a good, it's like if people who want to attack us to like put out a viable piece of like opinion, that's fine, right? Like the Dark Knight thing, right? Batman needs to be.
I know who you're talking about.
What?
I know who you're talking about.
What do you mean?
You're talking about the blog.
Your words, not mine.
Yeah. All right. Listen. Thanks for your time, man. All right. So how was that? What do you think of that? Was it good to get it out? Don't hold me to all the things discussed in there, because it was a while back now, and my position's changed, my editorial approach has changed on the site. But a lot of things we spoke about in the interview did ring true to me. I have to carefully consider the line between content and journalistic integrity, and I'm always getting feedback or harassed or insults for the path I tread. So yeah, it meant a lot to me to have that chat. And, that's one of the reasons I decided to go Bitcoin only on the show. Obviously Bitcoin is king, but also just to cut down on the airtime to questionable projects or just dealing with the flack or everything that comes in for it. It just made a lot more sense to me to focus on Bitcoin and the opportunities for Bitcoin. As I said in the intro, I was surprised to see the news that Pete had left CoinDesk. I think there may be a little more to the story that's been released, and hopefully I'll get to sit down and talk with him about this at some point. And yeah, massive loss to CoinDesk. Whoever snaps him up, he's going to be a massive game. He really is a great guy. So yes, I hope you enjoyed it. As ever, if you've got any questions, reach out to me. It's hello@whatbitcoindid.com.